Thank you, Jahan. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Great to be here. Congratulations, Katalyst Labs, for holding plus 92Disrupt so sharply and invitingly. Great to have such events, more and more, inshallah, in Pakistan. थोड़ा सा सबसे ज़्यादा स्ट्रेस मुझे आज एक बात की है और ये कि मैं द न्यू लिंगो फॉर लॉल को कैसे हैंडल करूँगी और लॉल का मतलब है लॉट्स ऑफ लोड शेडिंग. तो अगर जब बिजली जाए और मैं थोड़ी सी कंफ्यूज हो जाऊँ तो डोंट माइंड, वील टेक दैट टाइम टू internalize what Manan talked about, how we are being toxic about everything around us and how we should be more nourishing against all odds. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I think Jahan has done the intros. Would anybody like to say a little something more about themselves, which may have been missed? Nothing? I think it'll come around as we speak. So I'm not a designer. I'm a techie by education and was not very good at it, and then went into big tech sales. And I realized two things. Somebody smartly once said, design is intelligence made visible. And then somebody even smarter once said, but the public knows bad design better than it knows good design. And this is so true of our world. So design has always intrigued me. I'm not the expert and there's so much to learn from these experts here. So today we'll keep it a little light. Jo inshallah thoda sa time nikalenge. I'm watching the clock here in the end for people to ask questions also. I think design is an element of the overall solution development which is least considered, and it's always backwards कि आप solution बना लेते हैं और बाद में सोचते हैं अच्छा यार इसका design तो ऐसा कुछ utilitarian बना नहीं, ठीक है? And let's not limit it to tech only. Maybe we can talk about just, when we talk about masses, it's not just inserting tech into everything. It's also about just plain hack, which is something that my company Code for Pakistan now really promotes, which is the good kind of hacking, a civic hack, and that's really the most brilliant element of designing that one can indulge in. So let me start and please feel free to, बीच में फिल बदी आप जो कुछ कहना चाहें, जिस ज़ुबान में कहना चाहें, as long as everybody understands. I'll start with Safia. For no special reason, Safia, except that, well, I'll start with you. You and I have some things in common. We've returned to Pakistan recently. We've also been with Oracle for some time. You came in with the acquisition of Siebel. Your experience with Google, Intuit, etc. is very international. Tell me, when we design for the masses of Pakistan, one of the things that we often hear is tech literacy rate badi low hai. In your experience, when you're now designing with Rain Studios, how much emphasis do you put on that, the tech literacy low rate? Does it even matter? And when it matters, then how do you inhibit that, or how do you build around it, which maybe you didn't have to do for the more tech literate countries in the world?
This is a very interesting topic and very close to my heart. So coming back to Pakistan from Google and companies like eBay and Intuit, I'll tell you that low tech literacy is not a bad thing. The next billion users on the internet are going to be from these countries who have very low tech literacy rates. So right now, even companies like Google and eBay and all the top big tech like Facebook, they are trying to figure out how to design for low tech. So, I feel like when we say that in Pakistan, we make it sound like, oh, ye log hain, in log ki, itni literacy nahi hai. But it is the responsibility of people like us on this panel and, in this room to make the internet inclusive and, make design solutions that anybody can use. So, this is just my own, philosophy. Internet shuru hua tha Bay Area se, right? It started in a very highly educated, English speaking, right, like in America, right? And so initially it was designed for educated people, right? And all the solutions, all the problems were for developed countries. But now it's like democratizing, and the whole world is, all the leaders in tech across the world are trying to figure out how to bring everybody online, because you've seen the impact. We've seen how it has changed lives. We've seen how it has empowered, people in emerging countries. So this is something that it's not just for Pakistan. I think that Pakistan can play a very important role, but this is something that we are doing at a global level right now.
Good.
Sorry, long answer.
No, it's okay. Please feel free because I think rather to have a good clear answer and where you're coming from in your own experience rather than just talk about, what is theoretically there. That brings me to Ali. So Ali, I was looking at your profile and it said Savannah College. Is that correct? I don't know much, but I think it's very, quite famous for design learnings. लोगों को इतना पता नहीं है कि we talk about designing for the masses. There's a thing called human-centered design. So it goes from, I think, empathizing to testing, and your own company named after Ideate. Tell us what human-centered design is and give us some anecdotal evidence in Pakistan of where it's gone really south and where it's gone reasonably well. There are some few examples of good design also, whether it's tech-based or apps or something like, I don't know, an airport or a hospital, which we'll come back to Asad for later on. So tell us what it is, and are there any examples of good and bad?
Can you guys hear
me?
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think also adding on to something that was mentioned earlier, I think one of the things that I always try to sort of push back on is also not to think of design or technology as like a tool for us to be sort of saviors with. Like we can't go in and be like, हम आपको बचाएंगे, आपके बहुत मसाइल हैं, हम हल कर देंगे. And just because we have fancy degrees and all of those things. So I think there's also like a line to be treaded there where you want to take your learnings, want to take your experience into things and try to solve problems, but also not come in with an attitude of like, we know how to solve this problem. And I think that when we talk about good and bad examples, a lot of them actually align with that principle, where people tend to respect the culture that they're working with or the solutions that people have already figured out. You'll usually see a lot more empathy in the design that's being built. And when somebody comes in, again, from Silicon Valley or wherever, or any of our fancy schools as well, and goes into another environment and sort of as the person with the solution, and I'm sure you have a lot of experience with this as well, going into communities with health problems, a lot of people have very strong cultural solutions to things or contextualized solutions to things, and you don't want to supersede that with your own work. One of the examples in a slight tangent was, and a really good learning for me. I was working with this an agri-tech company, agriculture technology company, and we had a climatologist in the US, and he had a PhD from MIT, very, very smart guy. He had worked on his climatology model for Pakistan after his PhD. And that model could predict when, for instance, you should sow for different crops in different regions. So based on weather patterns, based on soil quality, all of those things, right? So he can tell you with quite a lot of accuracy, if you're growing wheat in this area in Pakistan, this is when you should sow. You go out, talk to the farmers. When do they sow? When they have the seed. So you can tell them exactly the dates that the best harvest will happen, but they can't do it because they don't have the seed. And unless you understand that model first and figure out like what the existing model is, you shouldn't even try to design for it. And I think that's really the core of human-centered design. What terminologies you use, whatever sort of those 5-6 steps might be, can all change and can all be sort of played around with, but essentially trying to understand the problem really well before thinking that you can have a solution, I think is sort of at the core of it. And that's also, I tend to disappoint quite a lot of people who will show me their apps and say, what can we do with this? I'm like, I don't know because I don't know your users. Right? And if I can go talk to your users, sure, I can come back with some things to suggest, but I will still need to test those with your users. And that's sort of the process that we follow at Ideate.
Wonderful. So this thing of talking to the users, we'll come back to in the next set of questions. I want to, before I go to Asad, want to make a sort of an anecdotal reference there as well. So the company that I work with, which is a not-for-profit called Code for Pakistan, we work a lot with the government, and especially the government of KP has been remarkably progressive, something that's been a bit of a discovery for me. And the last conversation I was having with them at the KPIT board, they said to me, हम हुकूमत और आप लोग जो हमारे सपोर्टर्स और पार्टनर्स हैं, हम मिल के सिटीजन्स के लिए सोल्यूशन बनाते हैं. तो आई टर्न अराउंड एंड आस्क्ड हिम, आई सेड लेकिन हम सोल्यूशन सिटीजन्स से क्यों नहीं पूछ लेते कि क्या सोल्यूशन उन्हें चाहिए. तो ही वाज क्वाइट फॉर अ मिनट. आई सेड लेट्स डू अ राइट-अथॉन एंड लेट्स आस्क देम, And he said, किसको बुलाएंगे आप? मैंने कहा मार्केट से जो भी मिल जाएगा सामने आएगा उसको बोलूँगी आ जाओ, वो पश्तो में लिखे, उर्दू में लिखे, अंग्रेज़ी में जिसमें भी लिखे. He said, नहीं, ये हमें पता है क्या प्रॉब्लम है. So this was like, I thought, an inherent mindset issue that we had. Of course, we've later reconciled and we've resolved it to some point where we're getting participatory process, which means the citizen on one side and government on the other. And I think that's what you're speaking to right now. Okay, unless I know who your audience is, unless I know what problem I'm trying to solve, how am I going to design well for it? Because that's a moot point otherwise, right? So good, meaningful point there. Asad, for some reason, I feel that AKU gets it, you know. Aga Khan University Hospital, or if you look at a Shaukat Khanam, you feel like it is warmly designed. I don't know what other word to use. Like, it's like something where you go and you feel, okay, yeah, somebody thought about me a little bit. Why is it that it doesn't work for most of the... Thank you. Most of the hospitals in the country, what is it that AKU gets in terms of design that others don't?
Thank you for the question. So, for a moment, I just want to zoom out because I am representing healthcare and medicine. I'm not a designer by training. So, when you asked earlier कि अगर कुछ add करना है तो disclosure है इधर कि मैं designer नहीं हूँ. मैं physician हूँ और मैं researcher हूँ.
So just to cut you there, Director CCIT, Assistant Professor and Chief of Emergency Medicine. So thank you for all the great work you did during COVID. A shout out and a thank you to all of the healthcare workers in Pakistan who did such a massively great job in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you for that because emergency room के अंदर, emergency department के अंदर हालत ख़राब हो गई है. अभी फिर से COVID के numbers are up actually.
Yes,
masks पहन लें. Just as so design of the hospital. उससे पहले मैं कुछ बोलना चाहूँगा कि healthcare heavily regulated industry है, and which makes sense because we are dealing with people's lives here. So designing also, I believe, becomes heavily regulated in certain ways. And how can you be creative when you're kind of limiting your design sense? So I'm just going to park that question there for a moment. Second point I'd like to make is that over decades now, the way we've looked at healthcare has been through the disease or illness lens, not so much from the people's lens or from the patient's lens per se. So it's poorly designed, right? Because you're talking about talking to the person. So empathy से start किया और हम लोगों ने फिर बहुत देर से ये सोचा है कि हम तो health care professionals हैं, doctors हैं, nurses हैं. By the way, just a show of hand, any physicians here? कोई भी नहीं है, मैं हूँ सिर्फ. Okay. So
if something goes wrong, we only have you.
So this is just one example as well. कि भाई इस किस्म का conference, which is a fabulous conference, I've learned a lot from yesterday. But I'm a very self-selected kind of an individual from a healthcare background. Over here, we need doctors, we need students of healthcare, we need medical students and nursing students over here. Anyways, won't get on to that soapbox now. But going back to your question, I'm trying to keep it relevant to that question. But I don't know whether we've got it even at Aga Khan University, by the way. I have that conversations with folks all the time over there, and it seems like they don't really understand, or we don't understand design through the lens that you're actually coming at it from. You might think that design is just like a nice looking hospital where patients feel comfortable and healing occurs. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, design is not just that. Design is a mindset. So how are we going to train our next generation of healthcare professionals when they're unable to think about design being a mindset? So don't know whether I can answer that question as of now, but why don't we go to some other questions, and I'll come back to you, and I can tell you about how we've gone about it as well through my innovation incubation hub.
Okay.
Right?
So we had also this morning talked a little bit about the challenges that you would have. So let's come back to that a little later. Safia, I'm coming to you again. I think Ali had mentioned something about market research. He used different terminology for it. But in my experience over many, many years, working for big tech, I realized that while the solutions being offered by big tech companies were immensely functional, they were like, you could go to a financial company, financial services company and say, I know more about your process than you do. I will be able to automate it and digitize it better. And we were right, you know. But where we failed and where the utility didn't happen was in the customer facing, as we called it, and now I call it citizen facing kind of, you know, aspect of it, where it just broke apart because my user was not ready to accept it. And I imagine that we conducted some user research, but maybe not enough. We conducted process research, but maybe not the end user research. So in your opinion at RAIN, and I know you're doing a lot of work with polio and a lot of, you know, sort of the current challenges environment, how much emphasis do you put on market research? And in a country like Pakistan where it's not really done that adequately, how do you go about it? Do you have a process? Do you have a methodology, a playbook for it, for market research?
You know, definitely. Like in user experience, the term we use is user research. And everything, like I think I was, you know, I heard this when I started the team and I started hiring, कि, you know, itna emphasis research pe nahi hai Pakistan mein. Like right now, I think I have a team of 10 people and it's like 5 designers and 5 researchers. So everything that we start with the user. And you know, that is something that Tanya, Mo, myself, you know, that we, and Khurram, we bring from our, you know, experiences at, you know, these big tech companies, like over there, like even at Google or any company that I've worked with, like research is held in very high regard. And research is not just like one kind, like the different methodologies, the different stages of the product life cycle. Like there was a, you know, people actually go and live with the communities that they want to serve, right? Like I think Google really believes that you know, you have to immerse yourself in that culture, and that yeah, even in COVID, you know, like we came up with other ways of doing research, but pre-COVID, we would actually go, and it's a very common practice that for, you know, for a user research study, it's not just the researcher's responsibility. The researcher will be paired up with the designer and product manager. And then, you know, together they'll go and they'll, you know, they'll do the various kinds of, like, whether it's diary studies or, you know, we used to call it follow me homes, which is like really you go and, you know, because this is like really simple common sense. You know, if I ask you, कि जी आपने आज नाश्ते में क्या खाया? And then I actually observe कि आप नाश्ते में क्या खा रहे हैं, it is not going to match, right? So what people say and what people do is never the same, right? So you actually have to spend time with the user and observe them, and then use your, you know, your educated guess, you know, and pair it up with, you know, what you've observed and bring those learnings back to the product teams. So at RAIN, that is our core, you know, philosophy. Everything we start. Actually, a funny anecdote, like, you know, मैंने logo बनवाया, Usman is sitting here in the audience, you know, and then one of my peers, you know, that I brought along is like a, you know, a LUMS professor for research, and I asked him, I said, you know, I want to do some research on the logo, and he was like, no one ever does that in Pakistan. Like people just, like, if the CEO likes the logo, that's the logo, yeah. Right? So he was like, that's a very different mindset that you guys are bringing. But yeah, so we do research for everything, and everything that, you know, that's how we design in the West. Like like at Google, you cannot push a pixel without user data behind it.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah,
and I think that is what leads to, you know, really useful, functional, beautiful products. And I think that's where we, you know, in the beginning you said, you know, Pakistan, I think is a little behind right now. We have some functional products, but you make them really usable, enjoyable, and delightful to use. I think that's why, you know, we've started RAIN Studios, like shameless plug here. But our goal is really to, you know, introduce Pakistan to products that will change your lives.
Yes.
Right now, there's a lot of investment going into building products. Like, you know, I see, like I signed up for some bank accounts and, you know, the usual things you do when you move into the country. And, you know, it's like the basics are not there. Like I go into a bank and the bank manager is filling my application, paper pencil pe. And then I asked him, I said, क्या आपने इस आपकी tagline में था कि online banking है. But he said कि हाँ जब account खुल जाएगा ना तो फिर online आप banking कर सकेंगे. Whereas, you know, in Singapore, I opened an account with DBS sitting in quarantine. You don't even have to walk into a bank. So, you know, a lot of things, like there's a lot of opportunity. And the sad thing is that banks are throwing money at it, but the user experience is missing, like you said, right? That is like the secret sauce that a lot of people are not familiar with. So because the user experience is not good, people don't use those products. And they're still going into the stores or the banks or wherever, to complete the task.
Absolutely. I think the banks in Pakistan, lots to learn on the user experience side. Needless to say, Monday morning I call it, that frustrating half hour for me when I'm looking at all of the banking transactions or trying to look at this or that, and I'm thinking, off you guys, go to Singapore and see how it's done, or just try to do something that Revolut is doing for everybody now.
Exactly,
So that's a long story. Thank you for that. Ali, you talked about seeds and being, you talked about the design of a process correctly, but let me take that to the urban masses again. Not just the urban, but let's say urban-rural cohesion एक चीज़ है कि हमारे यहाँ तो diametrically different two cultures हैं. एक urban है कराची लाहौर type और दूसरा villages हैं. तो something like digital data, for example, how do we create that cohesion? Is it even necessary? Should we keep the two worlds separate? Because I think, like you said, one of you had mentioned that these are the populations that will, expand and grow and will become the consumers of tomorrow. So how do you bring them into better experiences in life? Manan had talked about toxins and nourishers. I mean, even in that space, we do need the nourishers and need to shed the toxins. So the rural-urban cohesion aspect, how do you comment on that?
I would say that there is obviously that division that we can sort of draw this line around urban and rural and sort of have this easy way of thinking about it. And there are definitely some sort of, there's a lot of truth to those divisions in different cases. But I feel like even when we talk about those two as two groups, I think that is part of when you conduct research in, for instance, you pick out rural Pakistan, let's say. Where is that? Is that far up north? Is that somewhere in KP, South Punjab, Balochistan, Sindh? And we've conducted research in all of these different areas. And for instance, like in something like, even in the Kiryana store space, we can see people's attitudes towards something like interest or stock on credit change from literally one markaz in Islamabad to another markaz in Islamabad, because that markaz had somehow decided that one of their people would say, "Yaar, ye interest nahi hota, ye haram nahi hai." And then that becomes the cultural sort of understanding over there. And then that changes in another place. And that changes from village to village in like different places. So I think like understanding how granular these problems are and how complex they are, I think is a big part of just starting to work on them. And often one of the other things that we can come across quite often is that a lot of large organizations have a lot of data on their users or potential users. And we find this quite often. What happens is one of the large MNCs gave us data on some women that we had to interview this was in KP. And we went there, I think out of the first 10 we spoke to, 5 of them were basically, so these were people running their businesses. 5 of them were registered on somebody else's name and somebody else's CNIC. So those women are not in their network, but they're in the data. So all the data, and that sort of puts doubt on the hundreds and thousands of data points you have, but which were previously being used to make a lot of big decisions. But because nobody had gone and actually talked to people and talked at a level where you can gain some trust, it's often just very sort of surface level surveys. But when you go to talk to people and you're like, why did you not register? They're like, oh, I don't have an ID card. So my bhabhi has an ID card or my neighbor has an ID card. And some people didn't even know that their ID cards were being used. So then there's like loans around this being planned with the data just flawed. And all of this comes through when you go talk to people. And I feel like so even dividing, when you want to divide your users, really sort of understanding how complex this is, I think is a big part of what we sort of try to sort of talk to our partners and clients about. Because we don't want to pretend like your problem is easy. And sometimes people come in thinking their problem is really easy. And I can understand, so especially for like something like a startup, us telling them, you might not understand your problem is very difficult to take. And saying, let us like go into the field for 2 or 3 weeks just to make sure that what you're talking about is the problem you want to solve. And that's like, again, people here from startups know you've worked day and night for years on your thing, on what you're building, and somebody coming in saying like, oh, you might not know the problem that you're working on is not an easy thing to process, and I would be doing the same thing. And my example for that is, how many people here cook regularly? I like cooking. Anyone else? Yeah, okay, so let's imagine you spend 2 or 3 hours cooking. and then somebody, like, you give the food to somebody and they're like, "Yaar, acha nahi bana." Like, it doesn't feel nice, right? Now imagine somebody who spent 2 or 3 years building a startup and somebody's like, "Oh, ye aapne kaam sahi nahi kiya." So it's not going to feel nice. So we want to also be empathetic to that and not just be like, "Yaar, aapne galat cheez bana li hai." And how do you have that conversation is very, very important.
If you love somebody like me and कोई कहता है खाना अच्छा नहीं बना तो then I just dump everything and say खुद बना लो जाओ. That's how you should do it. Anyway, we're talking a lot about KP. I think KP is a phenomenon at a national level that one should speak more of because there's a lot of misconceptions around that as well, which I'm now discovering because of the extensive work that Code for Pakistan does in KP. But anyway, coming back to you, Asad, we had talked about some challenges. So you said to me, AKU also, although it seems like it gets it, maybe doesn't get it all, and the challenges are immense. So what are some 2 or 3 good examples? And I also want to say here, very, very apropos comment you made कि there's no physicians. ये हमारे साथ होता है कि हम कोई फोरम बुलाते हैं लेकिन उसमें हम प्रॉब्लम सॉल्वर्स सॉर्ट ऑफ लोग ले आते हैं हमारे जैसे कुछ pretensions भी उसमें होती हैं that like you said we know the problem, we'll know the solution, but the actual user is not there. It's many times, as I've seen in Pakistan over the years, that there's 7 or 8 men, no disrespect to the men, lined up in a picture, picture shoot, and it says on Women's International Day, women were, and it's like, where are the women, yaar? So anyway, coming back to you, where are the doctors? But what are the challenges, 1 or 2 or 3 you want to talk about that AKU faces? Or in the healthcare sector, Asad, that you have felt that healthcare faces? Take this one.
Oh, okay, it's working. So Mian, like you mentioned, के problems बहुत हैं वैसे actually on the men's, and so अगर मैं इनको like contain भी करूँ ना problems को, 1-2 problems I mention कर सकता हूँ. Let me focus this on what I have learned as being the lead for the co-innovation and incubation hub at AKU, because उसके through हम लोगों ने design के बारे में बहुत सीखा है, खुद ही से सीखा है, mistakes भी बहुत किए हैं, human-centered design thinking के strategies हम लोगों ने implement किए हैं, उससे सीखा है, students को पढ़ाया है उसके through. So जो challenges हैं ये कि आप एक ग्रुप को इसके बारे में सिखा सकते हैं, लेकिन it doesn't always translate into design across a hospital, for example, right? So आप एक eager एक crowd को कुछ बता सकते हैं कोई नई चीज़, लेकिन वो क्या does it then translate into कि आपका पूरे hospital का design बदल जाएगा? Probably not. लेकिन किस तरह से ये एक narrative है या एक जो नई चीज़ है about design thinking in medicine, how can that be disseminated now? And so designing for the masses, I think my population of interest is really healthcare professionals. So we focus a lot on healthcare professionals, whether they're students or practicing doctors and nurses or other folks. So we always make it a point कि हम लोग उनको बताएं design thinking strategies के बारे में, and it's been a lot of fun. We've done interdisciplinary hackathons at AKU for healthcare as well as non-healthcare topics. We've got people from outside of AKU contributing, coming on board as hackers as well as mentors, advisors, jury members, and so on. Jahan Ara has been part of our events as well in the past, and her team members. So that's just one example of how we could actually get healthcare or medicine to rethink its own stance. So challenges में आपने एक तो वो था कि disseminate करना किस तरह कर सकते हैं, और दूसरा funding is always a big huge challenge for us. Design strategies के लिए how do you get people who are experts, quote unquote, like Ali, if you would like to contribute your time and come to us, and then we'd be very happy to introduce you to our
always
students.
should be a plug there for something or the other that's useful.
Yes, exactly.
Great plug, yeah.
And so, so funding, yes, but we can work around funding as well. Mindset, people who are really interested. And AQ actually, going back to your earlier question, so what does AQ get? And I think AQ has allowed me and my team, because we are physicians and nurses for the most part, but it's kind of figured that, okay, these guys, they एक तो पागल हैं, crazy हैं, ये करते रहते हैं अपनी चीज़ें, इनको रहने दो, करने दो. So that really helps, because you're flying under the radar, and ours is what we call the skunk works of AKU. so that we go around and do some disruption in a somewhat in a contained manner, and then nobody gets gets bothered past a certain point. So having a team of that kind, and we believe that this is how you can also spread entrepreneurship in a huge organization. So being intrapreneurial versus being entrepreneurial. So that's been a lot of learning. There's been a lot of learning in that. And so I'm kind of giving you a few challenges, but also how we've seen those challenges as opportunities for ourselves as well. I hope that helps.
Can I add something to it? I think a couple of things. Firstly, I think initially you said you're not a designer. I disagree with that, and I also disagree with you not being a designer, because I think for us, again, in our design team as well, most of the people in our design team don't have design degrees. Because for us, design is the way you think about the user. So if you care about the user, you want to make things really understand what their problems are and then hopefully design for them, you're a designer for our definitions. And similarly, when we worked a bit in healthcare as well, and when you go into rural areas in Pakistan and work in healthcare, we talk to a lot of lady health workers. Whichever lady health worker is doing her job well is a great designer, because she really is trying to understand each woman's problem in the community and solving for them. So I also think like this gatekeeping of like कौन designer होता है, क्या definition होती है, is very sort of flawed. That's sort of the antithesis of what design should be.
Thank you for that. I do consider myself a student of design, but going beyond that was a bit, so I'm very encouraged. So there are about 9 minutes left. I want to open the floor for questions. I'll just, from my side, make one little comment related to healthcare and, the design in healthcare. My first two children, now as old as some of you in here, so I'm the wrong age at all to be here in the first place, were born in Pakistan in military hospitals. तो मुझे तो यही पता था कि वो 5 रुपए लगते हैं और बड़ी कोई तकलीफ़ तगोदौ से आपकी औलाद पैदा होती है और आपको हर कोई यूँ करके देख रहा होता है कि तुमने बच्चा पैदा कर दिया एक और and then my third one was born in the United States, where my husband was posted at the time, and well, we happened to have a baby there. And there was this new hospital where I was taken into this beautiful room, and there was like a window that showed green outside, and there was nice music, and the doctors had these nice colorful masks, and they said to my mother, first they asked me, where's your partner? And I was like, no, he's not going to come in here with me. So, and then he said, so who's with you? I said, my mom. So my mom had a place to sit also, I don't know if the pains were a little easier, but certainly I was more appreciative, and all through that experience, I was like, wow, this hospital, man, compared to the 5 rupaye wali, deliveries that I had before that. God bless the older ones. But I'll end with that. So any questions from the audience? Yes, right here. The dad with the little girl on the stage.
Yeah, that's the best introduction I've had in this conference so far. So my question is, I would like, I guess, each panel member to answer separately if we have the time. But
this is how you get free consulting, from like experts sitting on there. We want all of you to answer our question.
We always do this. So Ali especially mentioned that it's hard to take for founders or anyone who's running any sort of thing to be working on something for a few years or even months, and then someone coming in and telling them, this is wrong because this is the way you're supposed to do it. So they do their own research, speak to users and tell them that this is how we need to do it. A very sort of specific issue or question comes to my mind that, for example, if we have designed something and launched something, and now maybe there was a startup which didn't think about these things before, they just wanted to get their product out, and now they have someone coming in, an expert, and telling them, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is how we fix it. What is the speed at which we should be making those changes in the UX, UI, and design so that people who are using it don't, get frustrated? So very sort of specific thing that I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I can maybe go first. I think that that's a very good question, and I think very common for startups, because if we want the luxury of like a 6-month research period, that's not going to happen in a startup, right? So another thing, I've taught design in a few places as well. One of the things I always try to teach people, and because I've learned it sort of the hard way, was that designers aren't special. We need to figure out how to work with the person that in their system. So just like when we research, we go to the person's house. We never call anyone to our offices, never book a boardroom for talking to users. We'll go wherever they are, go to their houses wherever they're comfortable. Similarly, when we're working with a client, we want to figure out, are you working in 2-week sprints? What's your product roadmap? Where in that can we fit enough design research and design implementation in so that both you can still run your process, but we can also improve it. So it can never be like I'm coming in and like I only do this and take it or leave it. That's not going to work. So I think that's sort of like the general principle. Obviously, the details of this can change quite a lot. And part of that also is trying to sort of, and we at Ideate at least call our the clients partners. This is a partnership, because that's the only way you can work in this model where, especially with startups, you have to be involved in it every day, have to be involved in these decisions, and then figuring out कि आप roadmap में कहाँ place हो सकते हैं. We can't sort of come in and ऊपर से design आपके ऊपर झाड़ दें and be like, अच्छा, take it. So yeah, that's sort of like the methodology.
But just for that. So for example, if you suggest lots and lots of design changes, what is the speed at which we can roll out those changes? Like, do we in your experience, is it better to just do it that one-time exercise and just roll out a new version? Or do you sort of nudge those changes slowly? I'm pretty sure it depends on situation to situation.
Yeah, I think that's a very contextual question with your users as well as like the sort of company you are. There are companies with, or startups with these very excited beta users shuru mein jo hote hain. You can throw anything at them and they'll take it up, right? There are other companies that have users that have really been acquired with a lot of effort, and they're probably not as patient, so you want to be more careful, but again, it keeps coming back to what you want as a partner and not, we can't implement our sort of methodology on you.
I can just add to that. It's a great question. But जिस तरह Ali bhi bol रहे हैं, I think ये बहुत depend करेगा on the. There's no one size fits all here. So मेरे पास startups आते हैं या student-led startups आते हैं health के लिए, and it's really difficult because अगर उन्होंने या even professionals for that matter उन्होंने इतने महीने और साल लगा दिए हैं, तो उनको बताना कि आपका UX UI और वो सारा platform, you have to go back to the drawing board. तो मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ कि fundamentally health के अंदर we've actually started off with disease and illness in mind. So we're teaching people that now you can re-engineer or reverse engineer some of those processes and mindsets, but ultimately it will depend on the startup itself.
Yeah, quickly to add to that, fundamentally this approach is incorrect. कि आप 2 साल तक किसी चीज़ पे काम करें और फिर आप उसको unveil करें. Like, in my career, I've never worked on anything like that. I think a long time ago, enterprise software was designed that way in the late 90s and early 2000s. But usually, creating product solutions and software solutions, it's an iterative process. So, there's a term over there, we call it fail fast. So you launch something quickly, you get user feedback, and then you pivot. Usme hota hai ki people don't get so attached. So it's easier to absorb that feedback also, कि ये चीज़ नहीं चल रही है. So, at Rain also we have this approach where, we're working on a couple of ventures right now, but it's like it starts from research, you do some wireframes, then you go and user test it, then you iterate, then you go to the next fidelity. So if you keep that iterative mindset, then you will not get to that point where, 2 years later, you found out that, you weren't working on the right problem.
We have maybe one more, just one more. Yeah, thank you. Got so many questions, not enough time.
Hi, thank you. So I have a quick question. For general, when you do user research for, say, internally or external clients, how do you stop your research from just sitting on a CEO's desk or in a drawer? And how does it actually go from research to actually finally being implemented? And then what is the role that a person who's running that project within a company takes it forward, or as a consultant ensuring that you're not just doing research for the sake of it?
Yeah, so again, going back to the iterative nature, and also I think a very important aspect of product design and is the collaborative aspect. So, I think the model that you're describing, the scenario, इसमें ये है कि एक researcher आया, उसने research की और फिर एक report बना दी. Ideally research should be done in collaboration with the designers, with collaboration with engineering. And you have to kind of bring them on board first. कि भाई, this is what we are doing. You take them into the field, so that they can, reading a report is very different than seeing, your product being used or your idea being, vetted by real people and real users. So again, I think going back to the, it's a similar approach that I would have, that, don't take a project where that it's just going to sit, make sure that you collaborate and you build the relationships within the organization. And then, a lot of the researchers on my team, I actually ask them to give suggestions, like the report, collaborate with the designer or do the mocks yourself if you have the skill set, and tell us, how does this user insight translate into a design, right, or into the experience. So I think that aspect is very important, where it's not just a report, but it's actually tangible, recommendations on how it will improve the user experience.
I think we're flat out of time. There's so many questions. I'm now regretting not giving more time to the floor. My apologies, but the people, the experts are here. I learned so much from you. Asad, Ali, Safia, thank you. Stay in touch. And everybody, you can hound them after they get off the stage. Thank you for the opportunity, everyone.
Thank you.